Instead of spending your entire life saying this causes it, this causes it, this causes it, it's like go out there and find your dolphin, right?
And what happens? He's immediately just like, it's so fucking cold in here. The insulation, they ripped us off on the insulation.
The PNM bill. Yeah.
And like that's the whole point of that movie.
Good afternoon. My name is KC. Welcome to Jared to Jared. On this week's episode, the Jareds will discuss the Freedom Meter, Suburban Entrapment, Viviphilia and Necrophilia, the Death Simulator, and much, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines.
How was the hike? Did it make you feel better?
Yeah, it was nice. Got out there with took the dog out, Boo. That like big old gray Pyrenees.
Oh, right.
Love that dog, man. But yeah, it was nice. I went like pretty far in. So I got some exercise, was like wrestling around with the dog.
Nice.
So it was good. It was nice. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to the gym at my dad. We just kind of hung out for like 45 minutes, did a couple sets, but it was nice, getting a little bit of a calorie burn, plus just changing the scenery, man. I think sometimes we get so like enveloped in our homes.
Definitely.
I watched this really crazy movie yesterday called Hearts in Atlantis with Sir Anthony Hopkins. A-Hop. Me and A-Hop are actually connected in the universe because
we share a birthday.
Yeah, we share the same birthday. So, but
cool.
This movie is based on a Stephen King book, actually, and it wasn't really a horror movie. It was kind of like this guy thinking back to his childhood in the 50s, where he like met this dude who was Anthony Hopkins, who turns out to be like a psychic or something like that, and the FBI's after him.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of mystical, but it's not too much of a horror, but it is pretty good. But at the end, the main character has a digression where he's just like, why do we never think our home will change? Will never change. Why do we always think our home will stay the same? And when because he goes back to his hometown and so much shit's different, And like, that's always so unnerving for us. I wonder why that is, the changing of a home space.
Yeah. Hey, that's a good topic. We could dive into that. What's home? What is home? And why is it unnerving when the home space changes?
Right.
Yeah. Why do you think?
What other topics do you think we should get into?
Honestly, man, I have no topics except because when I was on my walk, I was thinking about it. I was like, man, what should we do? And all that came to mind was like, does free will exist? Like,
I have some thoughts on that. Okay. So I just heard a really good quote from my my favorite show, Fargo, one of them. There's a new season out, and the sheriff is talking to this character who's really rich in the show. And she's like, so what is freedom to you? And he explains all this like crazy, like, redneck shit.
Yeah.
But also like, just regular stuff we would think of, like taxes, against all this, letting like live your life, according to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So she's like, so essentially freedom to you is living without consequence. And he's like, well, I guess you're right, man. And she's like, there's only one person in the world who gets to do that. And he's like, the president? And she's like, no, babies. So essentially you're spending your entire life fighting for your right to be a baby.
That's cool. I like that take. I mean, that's definitely true. I think of our country as kind of like a nation of children. I think, it's just a lot of underdeveloped people who like mistake what freedom actually is. I think there's like sometimes we mistake like the freedom to consume for like the freedom to be who you are,
Right.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't
Is
know.
that our
What are
topic?
your?
Are we doing freedom, free will?
Let's do it, man. I say we're already delved into both these topics right now.
We're in it. We're in it.
So let me try to throw you a connecting question here. If we're so afraid, or it's so unnerving when our home spaces change over time.
Yeah.
Is the home space connected to an ideological like feeling of freedom? And when that space changes, we also lose some sort of our freedom. I don't know if I'm connecting these thoughts right, but do you kind of see where I'm going there? Because a lot of freedom as a youth is having a like safe home space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think our experiences as children then influence us as later on in life. So the changing, the unnerving change of the home space is sort of like symbolic way of losing your childhood freedom. Does that make sense?
Say that last line again.
So if your home space changes, especially for the bad over the years, right? Go back to your hometown, everything's run down, Kingpin style. Is that like a symbolic? That's like a metaphor for like you then losing your freedom that you once had as a child. Is that why we're so unnerved by our home spaces changing?
Well, I don't think freedom is something you can lose. You know, I think like true freedom is something like, I'm just thinking of like, oh man, what's that movie with Mel Gibson? Freaking the Scottish dude, freaking Braveheart.
Yep. William Wallace.
Like,
Freedom.
Yeah. But that kind of freedom is freedom that you can't lose. You know, I think there is this deep, inherent humanistic kind of freedom that, like, you know, it's just there. You're not always in contact with it, you know, but I think it's there. You know, you get these guys like Malcolm X or someone who are like literally imprisoned, right? You know, literally have their freedom taken away. But then these figures will say like nothing was taken. Yeah, I was in a cell, but that did nothing to my freedom. I still had the freedom of my thoughts, the freedom of my actions, and freedom of way of being, you know, even if it's being monitored.
Right. But
you know, so I think there's like a deep freedom.
Yeah. I guess in some way, though, even through that sort of stigma or that sort of, you know, formula there, freedom would also be connected to the loss of freedom would also be connected to the desecration of the home space, right? Especially if we think about it in a Mel Gibson sense of the way, you know, and a lot of these, like, you know, revolutionaries it's the, you know, going back home after you went and trained with your uncles how to swing the sword. You know, first I'll teach you how to use this, and I'll teach you how to use this, and freaking you come back, everything's changed, you know, the English are raping the women, you know, it's a desecration of what you once held dear, you know, a freedom that he had when he still had his father in Scotland, Robert the Bruce, you know, maybe that was before Robert the Bruce, but you see where I'm going there? I mean, at least maybe it's a representation of, you know, something that you nourish and held dear that is now being destroyed, or, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can see that. And definitely in those kind of like revolutionary narratives. I mean, the home space, the land itself is so deeply important to the culture, to your freedom to practice your culture, to practice your just, I don't know, all your ways of being, right? But what comes to me with, if we're going to bring up home in this, I think it's I think safety and security, you know, I think safety and security even more than freedom. I think that's what freaks us out. Because actually, I've heard, I don't know if this is totally true. It might be like pop psychology, but I've heard that moving is one of the most difficult experiences, right along with losing a relationship and losing someone to death, grieving. That moving is right up there with it, because it is a grieving process. It's difficulty. And I think our sense of safety and security is so wrapped up in our space.
Yes.
Especially if we're moving by ourselves versus like a nomadic people 1,000 years ago, like, everywhere you go, we're with like your entire community of like 150 people. But if you're moving these days from like one city to another, which a lot of people have done, most people have done, and sometimes you do without knowing anyone there. I mean, that's hard. That's a really hard experience. And I think a lot of safety and security is wrapped up in that. And a sense of freedom too, though, actually, of letting go of the home space, I think can actually afford a sense of freedom.
Right.
Now I'm not cornered by all the roles that, my hometown put me in, right? That sort of thing. I can move to this new town and like find out who I am independent of what all these people thought I was or something like that. You know, like a coming of age sort of story.
Yeah, for sure. Oh man, what was your first thought there? I had a good thought.
That home is if leaving home is unnerving, it's because home is a sense of safety and security. That one.
Darn. Man, I had a good response to that. I'm gonna have to think of it. It'll come back around to me.
Yeah,
but yeah, damn it. I had a good thought on there. I think though, yes. Oh, this is my thought. Okay. Here it came back to me. Is leaving the home as trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was your first thought. Is that it's like third in the list of losing a loved
just
one,
difficult experiences,
having a breakup, difficult experience, right? I think as a generational thing, millennials are very nomadic, and it's not necessarily by choice per se.
Mm-hmm.
Even me as a local who's only lived in New Mexico, out of circumstance because of being a dad, whatever. But I personally have lived multiple places in New Mexico, different houses, different apartments, freaking Albuquerque, whatever the case, because this ain't 1980 anymore. Like, land rents have changed dramatically, 400%, houses are getting sold, all this stuff, that the millennial generation has to face, like a really fucked up freaking inflation compared to, the inflation of pay is astronomical. We're basically like breadline people, compared to baby boomers and golden agers. So, I would say that, I don't know. How do you feel about that? Would you say the millennial are a nomadic generation?
Yeah, see, actually, well, yes, definitely. Absolutely yes to that. And then I think like when we talk about freedom in America, I think we also tend to mix up freedom and ownership. Because what you're describing right now with like baby boomers, golden agers, whatever, 1980s, I'm going to buy this like 5-bedroom house for like $20, whatever it was. Like part of that and the still the idea behind like buying a home is a sense of freedom, right? Like this is my space. I can do whatever I want with it. There's no like landlord to regulate it or increase the rent on me. It's mine. I own it. And there's a certain freedom that comes with ownership, right? But I question whether or not that's true freedom, because then you also have Amityville Horror style. Freaking love that movie.
Right.
That whole movie is about like suburban entrapment, right?
Yes.
The dude and his wife, they move into the freaking Amityville horror house, and what happens? He's immediately just like, it's so fucking cold in here. And the insulation, they ripped us off on the insulation.
The P&M
breaking out.
Yeah.
And like that's the whole point of that movie. Like, that's the subtext of the movie is like suburban entrapment. And like I talked to some of my homies, and it's like, that's a real thing, this a sense of I'm thinking of men who in particular, maybe this is true of women too, but like this, like feeling overly domesticated or chained or locked into your mortgage. And now because you have a mortgage, you're locked into your like job that you don't feel fulfilled in, so it's like, I think we have this impulse towards ownership, thinking it's going to afford us freedom, but then we feel locked in by our ownership.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But, optimistically, though, I think that makes, and this goes to your second point earlier, that leaving the home could be also something, that allots you freedom. And if we, just to touch on that quickly, if we think of Foucault, the heteronormative confines of the matrimony of marriage or whatever, that's exactly what he's talking about. Amityville Horror, P&M bill. It's so freaking cold in there. You're so worried about not getting a boner for your wife. Like, you got to chop wood. They want to fire you at your job.
Yeah.
You just bought a brand new house that they screwed you on. All of a sudden you're getting haunted. Of course.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
oh man,
you couldn't in other generations really leave situations like that. And that's another thing that millennials have really offered, what was really like adopted, is divorce and not getting married. Right. There's a lot of millennials that didn't end up in suburbias and didn't get married. And even if they did, they like rented a house with their girlfriend of 7 years. And now they're like, moving out. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a lot less confining than, the substandards of a golden age home ownership and marriage, a baby boomer home ownership and marriage. And if we go even earlier, you couldn't even travel, really at all. You wanted to go to Oregon, you're going to freaking die on the Oregon Trail, an 80% chance of like cholera, getting freaking shot, anything, So the nomadic culture for millennials, it happens on the yin and the yang, for both ways. And that, for lower class, I think especially, pretty traumatizing. You always have to move because everything's so expensive and we don't make money.
Right.
On the other hand, it's good you can move because you can leave abusive situations, confining situations, even as couples go buy a van, go live on the road. We have different substandards, I think, for our like life stories.
Yeah. And I think there's option paralysis too, which is, we have this like plethora of options, but thinking that that's going to be freedom, right? And I think that's the promise of like American consumerism, which really was the defining feature of like, golden agers, baby boomers, whatever, is this idea that like, oh man, so much freedom, dude. You could buy a house in any town you want. Everything's so affordable. Just like work an okay job. You could do whatever you want, bro. You could own like 2 boats and go on a nice vacation every year, or whatever. I mean, it was still life. I don't mean to like overinflate how nice it was or whatever, but I think that they were really into this idea of just like consumeristic options. And now everything has its light side and dark side, right? So if they got to experience like the light side of like American consumerism, I feel like we're experiencing the dark side of it now. Like the other shoe has dropped, where it's like, no, it's not just like have whatever you want all the time. It's like being taken advantage of financially. It's option paralysis. What do I do with my life? Where do I go? Fragmentation of the village, bro. The village is broken, and part of that is because we have like too many illusory villages to choose from. It's like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. What should my job be? What should my role be? Dating app. Should I date this person or that person or that person or that person or that person? And then we kind of crumble under the option paralysis. So, is freedom of option freedom? Is freedom to consume freedom? Apparently not, because we're all, kind of crumbling under it.
Right.
So what's freedom if it's not what, the past few generations defined it as? What is it?
Right, right.
And
What
are you free? Let's make this more personalized too, because I like when we get into Jared,
sure,
our
sure,
life stories.
sure,
Do you
sure.
feel free? Do I feel free?
Right. What causes it,
What causes it?
The world causes
This
it.
causes it.
This causes it. Poisoning the airwaves.
Technological overload.
Because we can't live without it. I feel like a lot of freedoms have been taken away from me because of career choice, as much money as I make every year. Of course, these aren't necessarily just freedoms of product, new truck, house, whatever. It's a freedom of mine to pay my bills, to feed my loved ones, in the house, and to also go on trips and experience. Experience can be very expensive, especially social experience. And on the other hand, though, because of my career choice, I've also have lots of time. I feel like I have lots of life credits. I make pretty good money as it is. Sure, I can't be Rick Steves and go on 2 Europe trips a year, but I don't even know if I'd want to do that anyways.
Yeah.
Eventually I get to afford 1 trip a year, maybe get a new truck or something eventually, whatever the hell. And essentially I do have a lot of freedom when it comes to, doing podcasts, reading books, writing books, hanging out with friends, family, my daughter constantly. So it's a yin and a yang, and I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I've really spent a lot of my time in my 30s, especially, being nostalgic for the moment. Because when you get older, I felt this in my life, you really start channeling nostalgia. You have more memories to look back on, to be fond of, or to reflect on. And going back to last week when we were talking about, solving problems or getting through problems, kind of a dopamine rush. Well, nostalgia does that for us too, because we think back to that problem or that time, even if it was hard and we got through it. We're here now at the gym. We're here now doing J to J, and it feels good, whatever. So I've been trying to realize that no matter what the situation I'm in, appreciate the freedom that I have now. The freedom to to work, to, even when at times where I'm like, fuck, man, I don't want to go teach or whatever. There's some people who can't even walk, can't even agoraphobia, whatever, get in front of people. It's good. I've been being like, fuck it, I'm going to go on the freaking go do 5 miles on the elliptical because I can, geez, there's some people that probably wish, old Superman when he got kicked by the horse,
Yeah.
So, I've been feeling that freedom is attached to nostalgia for the moment, trying to be content with also a drive to make things better, of course, but,
Yeah. Freedom is attached to nostalgia for the moment, which is to say, nostalgia for the moment is really presentness, right? Just being presently participating in your day-to-day life, showing up, being active in your own life. Viviphilia,
Exactly. Ooh, I like that. I like that. Yeah.
That's cool.
Man, that episode was good. Like and subscribe. Becoming Human.
Oh yeah.
Can you touch on that a little bit before I ask you about your sense of freedom right now? Can you touch on that viviphilia aspect? I like that a lot.
Yeah, just like the idea.
Sure.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Actually, this ties into what what we were talking about with like home too, in the home space and all of that actually ties in quite well. But yeah, pretty much viviphilia, just literally meaning love of life, which is like a term. No, it's like we know all the, like, everyone knows necrophilia, love of death, right? Everyone knows that word, and all the fucked up things you think of when someone says that word. But like, no one who I literally never heard the word viviphilia until I thought of it,
Right.
Love of life. But pretty much the idea is, this is hard to say, but we're constantly recoiling from our own lives. I think, we're constantly sort of like boxing ourselves in because we desire a sense of safety and security. Right.
Right.
So for example, I don't know, I feel my mind feels safe when I know what to expect all the time, right? When everything is in its place. It's kind of like the OCD mind, which is like everything is in its place. Everything has its nice categories. I know what to expect from everything and everyone at all times, right? This is who I am. This is who you are. This is how the world is, right? All that sort of stuff. That's necrophilia, in the sense that you're treating the world as a dead thing. Something that at best you can intellectually dissect and think about, but what do you dissect? You dissect dead things.
And even like a religious thought too, like I'm gonna live for a paradise or heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
You're obsessed with your death. Like,
yes, totally.
Love the life and be obsessed with what you're doing. With being present. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's necrophilia in the sense that it's prescriptive thinking. It's ideological thinking, This is how things are. And think, everyone knows people like this. This is how it is. All right. Word, guess you know everything, right?
Right.
And then actually it also comes into like racism, sexism. That stuff is also forms of necrophilia, because you are putting human beings, which are infinite, right, into these categories, into these boxes, which is really an attempt to make yourself feel safe. I know what to expect from that person. This is how women are. This is how minorities are, whatever, right? As opposed to viviphilia, which is approaching life open, approaching life openly, allowing things to kind of come into you, absorbing the life in front of you, right? Participating, open to life. I don't know what to expect today. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what to expect from this person. So I don't know what to expect from myself, right? So you make this sense of spaciousness where life can truly happen.
Right.
And you're engaged more fully with it. So I guess that's viviphilia. I don't
know. Would you classify viviphilia as being something that is focused on the present home space? Or would that be more of a necrophilia, type of mindset?
Yeah, it depends on how we approach it, right? I mean, because, because if your home space, if you're clinging to a home space, right? Think of like, okay, someone's living in a bad situation, whatever that situation is, but they're afraid to leave. Right? It's kind of the whole idea that an unknown or a known hell is safer than an unknown heaven, right? That sort of thing. So if you have someone who's, living in like a negative home space, there's nothing positive about it, but there's difficulty leaving it because you're like clinging to it. There's like the Stockholm syndrome kind of thing, I feel like that's kind of a necrophiliac approach to life. And then viviphilia would be opening up, taking the fool's leap. What's next,
Sure.
But, it depends, because I've also met people who have been wanderers and nomads because they were running away from something, and settling into a home was unfamiliar. Settling into a home was scary.
That's interesting because, and the religion I was raised in, they're real like, apocalyptic, based, Armageddon based.
Yeah.
And they used to tell people, not to buy homes or like not to buy businesses or things of the world, to store up treasures in heaven, because literally they thought for the better half of 80 years, 100 years, that Armageddon's like tomorrow, like in a few weeks, like my uncle, when my grandpa died, Dion told me this story that he literally didn't think that he would ever see my grandpa die. Like
Right.
he never, like, literally didn't think that was possible. He thought, like, paradise on earth would be here before then,
Wow.
So that's definitely, like, a necrophile right there, filing away, just like an obsession with the future, an obsession with death, an obsession with, some sort of everlasting home space, which never really exists unless you consider space itself our home space.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing, because that actually makes me think of Viviphilia too. Viviphilia is not anti-death. I don't want to draw like a false dichotomy here where it's like just Viviphilia and then Necrophilia totally separate, because I think the whole idea of Viviphilia is stepping into this sort of I don't know, that sort of like gooey ambiguity of life where you have uncertainty, but there's peace in that uncertainty, right? You can open to it and allow life to surprise you with things, including death, because I think in order to open as fully as possible to life, that also means opening fully, to our own death especially, more than others.
Sure.
Because that, and this came out of that, the idea came out of that book, The Denial of Death, Ernest Becker, where he talks about, like, actually, I think he actually calls it necrophilia. Yeah, that idea is coming from him, and then I sort of responded with the Viviphilia thing. But yeah, he pretty much talks about how it's like it's this deep-seated existential dread, this deep existential fear of our own impermanence, right? That makes us clam up, that makes us fucking tighten up. Oh God. And then gather all this shit that we can. This is the hoarder mentality. If I just hold on to all this shit, if I just attach myself to an ideology or an institution, I'll be safe because it's bigger than me and I'm impermanent, but that's not. So maybe if I attach myself to it, I'll be okay.
Right.
Turns out to not be the case, right? But anyway, so I think opening up to your own demise, your own death, and actually there's meditation practices like this where I've done this on mushrooms, like lie down on the floor and pictured very vividly the maggots coming and just taking little bits of me, a little bit at a time, and it wasn't morbid, when I did that kind of meditation with myself, it wasn't morbid. It actually felt quite freeing because it helped me generate at least a little bit more peace with my own death, and then through that, you're not hanging on so tight, and then you can open to life more clearly.
I like that a lot. I like that. Yeah. That was a returning to earth meditation right there.
Exactly, bro. And then I actually
I'm an earth sign, very earthy, like it.
Yeah, it's very, very earthy. and that was, and part of that meditation too, the maggots coming to take away my little bits. One at a time, there actually felt to be there's a sense of grace in it too, and peace, where it was back to the earth. It wasn't the fucking maggots. It was back to the earth. Just the earth sending little carriers to come and take a little bit of me one at a time to bring it back to the earth, and that's okay. And there was such peace in that. There was let go. There's a moment of let go. So
sure, and I would consider a viviphile pro-death part of the cycle of something that is part of life. And that's the funny thing, is people that are like, I would say in that, not to say anybody can be 100% okay with it, but,
sure,
in a sense, okay with, it's going to happen, blah, 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 they, it's almost like, nah, I'm going to kill myself, but pro in the sense that, yes, I don't want to live until I'm 120 years old. I don't want to live until I'm as old as Joe Biden. Like, I just, you know what I mean? Like, I want to live a good life, and it's going to happen and whatever. Like, I've always personally, especially when you have to leave a crazy religion that's really, has like pretty radical ideology, this one of those psychologists in the show was saying, you realize these people have to like rearrange and rethink their entire reality of what they once thought was true,
Yeah.
And when you do that, I feel like when I was younger, I already accepted a death and then realized that life goes on after death, and I'm living that life right now.
Yeah.
So when I die again, I'm going to feel in the future, whenever it may be, when I'm heck with it, older than Joe Biden, as old as Bilbo.
Yeah. That's all this Bilbo.
I'll die then, accept it for what it is, and then we'll see what happens after that,
Yeah. 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 And I think having a death in your own life, whatever, metaphorical, literal, near-death experience, I think actually can be really important. I mean, thinking of, a lot of like spiritualistic people say, I'm not sure where this line actually comes from, but like, this idea that if you die before you die, you won't have to die, which is to say, like, whether through like a moment of deep spiritual awakening or an ego death moment or a literal near death experience, that actually frees you of this fear of death, and all the constriction that comes from that. And then, ideally, depends on the person. Ideally, you approach the actual death and then you say, well, this sucks, but I've made my peace. This is okay because I know what happens on the other side. It's just transformation. It's not actual demise. It's not a true end. It's just transformation. And I think it's easier to say that if you've experienced some kind of personal death. I mean, I've certainly had personal deaths that were moving. Moving is a kind of death. I mean, letting go of everything that you once knew to go to something else.
That's what happens is going back to the beginning, when we leave the home, that's sort of a transition or a change. But the ideology and the reconstruction of the home as to what we remembered it when we were there, that never changes in our heads. And then when if we were to see a visual representation of that is certainly way more negative than we remembered in our head. Like if I left for 20 years and came back to Santa Fe, and the street I live on is burnt to a crisp or something like that, and there's just like, a bunch of like crazy aliens living in there, not getting taken by the government, freaking precinct 5, I'd be pretty sad. I would be very sad, because it would be a death of a symbol that I built in my head, or a death of right?
Yeah. A death of a symbol that you built in your head, right? Which isn't an actual death. It's just a death of a thing that you might have been clinging to.
But I think our brains process it similarly.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
That's why they call it the death simulator. Remember we talked about this 5 years ago in Albuquerque.
Yeah, that was a cool one.
The death simulator. So Dr. G, shout out Dr. G, freaking smartest man alive. Love him. Bruno, Doogie Howser, he was saying that they signed up, he'd show us a lot of scans and studies, and they put people up to monitors, CAT scans, EKGs, all this shit. So when you die, certain parts of your brain light up, certain parts don't, and they would call this, they did. So they started mapping out which parts of your brain light up to which cortex is this and that when you die, when you're processing death, when you first, they literally, like, as soon as somebody would like get a diagnosis, terminal diagnosis, they would ask them, can we ask you a few questions and hook you up to some machines, blah, 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 sign this waiver, get paid this, Anyways, the doctors that did this study then did this on people who just got a divorce, or just went through, you know, a major tragic freaking loss of a loved one, of a job that they like held dear onto or something like that. But they especially focus necessarily on like, you know, relationships, intimate relationships. And what happens is the brains were lighting up in the exact same places. Wild, and I think there's a other doctor who talks about it on TED Talks too. And it's basically the death simulator is what they called it. That's the name of the study, because essentially your brain, it's very easy for your brain to simulate death. Not easy per se, but you know, the same emotions that happen to you when you're going to die.
Yeah.
Same shit when you like break up with someone, you know, or get broken up with someone you really love, or, you know, lose That's a great. Best friend you really cared about, or, you know.
Yeah. A friend of mine had this good line where he was working at the time with like a bunch of like younger people, like teenagers and stuff. Right. And he's like, at the time he was probably like 30 or whatever. Right. And when these kids ask him like, do you have any, you know, advice for the next 10 years or whatever, you know? So my friend, he goes, go get your heart broken. Like, that's my advice, you know? So then this kid would be like, or these kids would be like, that sounds awful. Like, no, what do you mean? You know, like, I'm in a relationship. I would hate it if my boyfriend and girlfriend left, you know? And my friend goes like, no, well, that's the point. You're clinging, you know? And it's like, go find some wisdom, you know, go through the death simulator, go through that process. And I'm sure everyone who's on the other side of that, I mean, literally everyone, you know, listening to the pod or just anyone out there, like, who has gone through like a really heavy breakup or something like that, you know, once the dust has cleared, I guarantee you look back on it and say like, wow, I grew so much. I have so much more wisdom now, or just like, who was I then? Like, I was so you know?
Right. I've met people that have like never gotten broken up with or heartbroken. These people have props, so many props, you know, and you can't grow and you can't learn. And I know certainly for myself, like turning into the man I am today, you know, without all the heartbreak I went through with like these women that I loved. I mean, if you took 18-year-old Jared, you know, 17, 16-year-old Jared, and if I would have like stayed with Natasha my whole entire life from like freaking, you know, high school, I would still be a douche. I feel, you know, hopefully I would have grown and had to go through some shit. But, you know, I just think that like that was a humbling experience. This is a humbling experience. This is a humbling experience. You know, not to get Rollins on the listeners here, but freaking, you know, I think in a Jesus sense too, like we got to take our egos down a lot of times. And a lot of times this happens through the universe by, you know, just taking things out of our control, sort of like you're saying too, you know, and just being like, you know, I can't act this way or be this way and still expect to hold on to the things that I hold dear, you know, and then you have to grow and change and reflect. And then, of course, sometimes I feel like we do get into like relationships, especially that, you know, aren't good for us and we're not aware of it in the moment. And it takes that breaking up and the near death experience and the death simulator to be like, oh, my God, that was so bad for me. I need to move on. And it's funny with people that have near death experiences, a lot of them stop doing heroin, stop cheating on their wives, or go and quit that job they hate so much and go become a carpenter, you know, go work at Jim Bob's, because they find out, you know what, money's not worth it. Fucking all this crazy, stupid American like ideologies and capitalist bullshit, not just American, worldwide, that we worry about. It all doesn't matter because when you're like, because it could all be gone, you know, the actual death, not the simulator, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of my favorite lines from the Tao is, if you want to be reborn, let yourself die.
Ooh, love it.
Yeah, you know.
Right,
I
right.
mean, that's it. That's it. If you want to be reborn, let yourself die. And again, for some people, that's like a literal near death experience, and you hear beautiful stories there where, I mean, that would suck.
And we're not advocating people.
Not advocating.
Don't go do this.
If it happens, it happens.
It's a metaphorical. The Tao meant metaphorically, all right?
Yeah, yeah. But if but if someone has a near death experience, you hear these stories about people coming out kind of a bit more free, talking about freedom, like a little more free, where it's like you're saying, they reassess, oh shit, what have I been wasting my time with? Why was I clinging to that shitty job or relationship and stuff? Necrophilia, that's why, because it was a dead thing, but I knew what to expect.
Right.
I mean, I spent too much time in Albuquerque, dude. I should have moved 2 years before I actually did out of that town. And why did I stay? Because of that. It was, the known hell thing. It was like, this is a pretty garbage existence right now, but I know what to expect every day. There's a sense of safety in it. Rather than launching out into the unknown, which is like, oh God, the unknown, anything could happen.
Right.
And that's the beauty of it, right? But it's also scary.
You're right.
Yeah. Or people, so these near death experiences, or again, actual ones. I mean, like, or metaphorical ones rather, which I feel like I've had freaking plenty of way too many metaphorical deaths at this point.
I'm done.
I'm done, bro. Actually, if anything, I need to like freaking
stay alive for a while. Be a viviphile. Live. Yeah.
Oh man, that's funny.
But I do like our conversation the other day. Me and Jared with an A. We want to go back to the town where we met and try to reflect in on some like nostalgia for the past, and try to.
I'm not ready.
Hone into like a good sense of feeling, and because
we'll do listen, it,
Viviphile, man, we're just trying to live here and trying to celebrate like the life as well, because regardless of what happened, you made it through. It was freaking problem solved, and perhaps who knows? Maybe that could have been the place you needed to be at that time, going back to that story of it's good you didn't get drafted to the war, is it? I don't know. We'll see. And then next day you break your leg. It's like shit, blah, blah, blah. Like we just never know.
Who knows what's good or bad? Yeah, that's a good one.
Right. So,
yeah, man. And actually, I was from the episode before the episode we're recording now, the Time Jumper Jared one.
Right.
That one, that it was one of the final points. Oh man, about the how the bigger the problem, the bigger the dopamine rush in your brain. Right. I feel like that's like a necrophilia thing too, because it's like, the brain like wants to problematize everything so that it can then have that, false release, the dopamine rush,
Right.
Where the reality is, oh no, there is no problem,
Right.
No problem. So then I think that's the viviphilia, is just like, oh, life is just flowing. What's the problem? Why do I need to push against it so much, rather than it's something that I'm occurring with,
Sure. By also avoiding that necrophiliac tendency, like you were saying too, which it could go on the other side of like constantly running from a home space, thinking you need to totally. The future, right? And really, it's like just be a viviphile, stop and smell the,
And the future is dead, bro. Because in the sense of like, where is it? Show me the future.
Right.
Like, show it to me. It doesn't exist, right?
I mean, if we had the chronovisor, but that's in the Catholic Church, and they deny its existence. So,
Right. We've seen it though.
So would you say that, what is your sense of freedom? Would you say you've been living, your best viviphile life right now? Or how would you gauge your freedom meter right now?
My freedom meter. Yeah, I guess depends on the levels of it. I mean, okay, so ultimately I'm going to say freedom from ourselves, right? I think is like the main thing. And I don't mean that in like a self-hatred way, trying to escape the self sort of thing. I mean that in a okay, in the same way that, you know, the bigger the problem, the bigger the dopamine rush. So the brain actually seeks out problems, you know, and we get into these kind of like habitual thought patterns that actually aren't great for us.
Right.
You know, so I think of like, okay, conditioning, habitual thought patterns, things like that, right? So if I go into, I don't know, I'm conditioned. That's it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I'm conditioned. I'm a human being who has psychological conditioning. That's all of us, right? Some of it's good, some of it's bad. But either way, I think of those as kind of like constraints, right? Because and that's necrophilia too, right? Because if I'm working, if I'm using conditioning that developed when I was 5 years old to like behave as an adult, there's no freedom in that, right? And, you know, you see that in like relationships all the time, right? I mean, someone has like anxious attachment or something like that. And where did that develop? That developed when they were like 4 years old and their mom left, or like whatever happened, right? And then they get into a relationship, even if they're like freaking 35, 40, 45 years old, and they're still working from that place of anxious attachment. It's like, that's pure conditioning, necrophilia. There's no freedom in that because they're not meeting the moment as it truly is, meeting themselves as they truly are. So I think that's sort of I guess that's how I'm thinking of like freedom right now, you know, in my relationship to freedom. And on that meter, it's hard to say, man, because it goes in and out, you know, because sometimes I feel deeply free. I'm like, wow, holy shit. Yeah, I'm seeing all my stuff, seeing my psychological shit, seeing it clearly and healing, going to therapy, letting go of it, making like incredible, beautiful progress on these things, you know. And then it comes back, you know, and then you kind of regress a little bit, which is just part of a process. It's part of life. That's okay, you know. But then there's moments of just like, I don't know, slipping back into feeling locked in myself, kind of, you know, locked in these habits that I'm in the process of letting go of, but haven't fully let go of, that sort of thing, you know.
I mean, I'd say we're on similar scales here. And okay. I think that goes with a lot of people is freedom is a compromise. I don't think that freedom is something that any of us have 24 hours a day.
Sure.
Like 365 for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
I think it's a compromise. I think and it's not just because I have to, you know, like it's not a compromise all the time would necessarily just because I have to. You know, I've had friends that like boom, they quit their job, whatever, and don't have like something to do, like a Zen monastery, girlfriends, whatever. They literally are just like, cool, freedom. And they're like, you know, living at home, whatever, with their parents, which they don't mind, you know, single dad, whatever. Mm-hmm. And eventually, little by little, slowly by slowly, it fucking eats at you, and it eats at you, and it eats at you. And what you thought was going to make you free, it doesn't make you free because you can't enjoy it anymore. And all of a sudden it just freedom becomes your cage and becomes your prison, you know? And I think that in order for us to enjoy, you know, a lot of things in our lives, we need the other side of the yin and the yang to appreciate it and to really like, you know, even like people that are, you know, in our class of financials or whatever, just like man, money's wasted on the wealthy, like how much I would like appreciate that or whatever the case, or do this or anything, because we have the other side of the yang to appreciate the yin of riches, what I mean? Like, I think there's constantly sort of that, and that might not be the best example, but I think in order to enjoy resting on your couch, you have to work somewhat during the day, just like me and you were getting anxious today. No matter what the work is, but you went for a hike. I had to go to the gym, lift some weights, and like communicate and socialize with like father, freaking whatever. And then I feel good here now doing an episode with you, whatever, like, and can finally enjoy the freedom of the night. And that's where I think that freedom is constantly not always what we think is consciously in our mind, but more of a result. It's an equation. It's not equals zero. It's 0 plus 1 equals 0. You still have to have that plus 1 of effort to get to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, 0 plus 1 equals 1. English major, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about it's just the cyclical nature of life, right? I mean,
exactly,
which is inevitable, which is absolutely inevitable. And I think that's part of it. I mean, when I talk about like letting go of, conditioning or shit like that, going to therapy, letting go of things, I don't mean in a sense that like, I don't mean that I'm going to like escape the cyclical nature of life. Well, because that's still more running away. That's still more running away. You have your moments of work. Yeah, you have your moments of rest. You have your moments of day and night, and being single and being in a relationship, or spending time alone and spending time with others. Whatever, being young, being old. Like the cyclical nature of life is totally inescapable. But I think it's more, at least for me, in this process of doing therapy, meditation, all this stuff, it's actually releasing older issues that I was still holding on to, so that I can more authentically and effectively and honestly address the cyclical issues that are happening presently in front of me, right? Because it's kind of like, again, okay, anxious attachment, something like that, or avoidant attachment, whatever, attachment theory. If you're caught up on shit that happened, 4 years old or something, that's actually holding you back from like meeting the moment, meeting the problems of the new moment, because you're still caught up on the problems of the old moment, Right. Yeah. And again, it's a process. I don't think it's like, you snap your fingers, you went to therapy for, 500 days, and that's the magic number, and now you're healed and never have to like, you don't have a past anymore or something like that. I don't think it's like that. I think it's more about learning. Okay, here's the position I'm at. Here's my relationship to freedom right now. I'm getting really, really, really good at learning my operating system. That's not to say that operating system doesn't exist, that I'm pushing it away, cutting it out, reboot the whole system or something like that. It's not that. I know my quirks. I know my stuff. I know my, for the most part, I'm still learning, but I know the operating system, and know like, okay, I'm feeling kind of off today. Getting a little bit overly in my head. All right, let me go outside and hang out with the dog and get some nature. And that will like, I know that's a good addition to the operating system, Right. And I think there's a bit more freedom in that, as opposed to like getting in my head and then just like continuing to sit inside and like scroll through my phone or something, Right.
I like that. I think, and you don't, a lot of what I've always felt too is you could sort of build these Zen temple places in your head, no matter what it is, without an attachment of X, Y, and Z, right? Or you can go to a Zen temple too, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I think that I think what you're saying is definitely spot on. You're essentially wanting to become a computer programmer of your own hard drive or your own self, right? You're just understanding the
exactly.
program better. You're going through the training of Adobe Audition because it's so complicated. Instead of just saying,
Yes,
fuck Adobe Premiere, I'm going to use, Champ
exactly.
Pick because it's free and easy and made for people that
'Cause
don't
that's
like want to put in the effort
yeah,
to know their own program. Hey,
exactly,
take a
exactly,
few years, learn your program, and always realize that it's not AI. We're always growing. It's an
exactly.
organic computer, right?
Exactly. And that's Viviphilia. It's an organic computer that's in a constant state of flux. Yeah, and I think when you try and like trade out the operating system, okay, I got rid of this one and now I'm on this new one. Anytime you meet people who are doing that trip, because a lot of people do, it comes off as inauthentic. And there's still that question of what are you running from, right? Because you have like, someone who's like, oh man, I like used to be that, but like now I found this new spiritual community and I live at the temple and like, oh, look how awesome I am. And it's like no, you're still avoiding some shit. There's something there,
Right, right.
so it's not about cutting out the operating system. It's about, oh cool, all right, this is who I am and that's okay. Let me work with it. This is the life, this is my karma, the life I was born into, whatever. Okay, great. And it's not a bad one, let me work with it. Okay, cool. And
Right.
that's to say, one more thing too is like I think very often we get caught up on like in sort of like therapy conversations and things like that. Often we get caught up on like, this is all of the childhood conditioning. This is the stuff that happened during my childhood that made me who I am now, right? And we forget about, well, what's the stuff that's happening right now that's making you who you're going to become? Because what's happening, our neuroplasticity never goes away, so the experiences that we're having today as men in our 30s is going to create who we are in our 40s and 50s and so on, and
Right.
honoring that and using that to our advantage, and since we're adults, being able to say, okay, well, this is the kind of environment I want to be in. This is the kind of people I want to be around. These are the kind of experiences that I want to have. These are the skills I want to learn,
Right. Instead of spending your entire life saying this causes it, this causes
Exactly.
it,
This
this
causes
causes
it.
it.
Yeah.
It's like go out there and find your dolphin, right?
Yeah, and that's the limitations of Henry Rollins' character in Johnny Mnemonic. He's blaming everything. He's just blaming everything. Like,
Right,
yeah, man, I
right.
get it. It's like the technological 21st century kind of sucks,
Yeah.
for sure.
But I
But
need
at the
this
same
tech out of my head, man.
On behalf of the Jareds, thank you for listening. Follow and tell your friends about the show. The Jareds will be back next week. And always remember, be happy for this moment. This moment is your life. Tune in next time